folks with social anxiety disorder. We got places in the corner for you.
What time does 7 o'clock meeting start?
7 o'clock. Thank you, Sean. Welcome to Position of Neutrality. Welcome to New Freedom. We start every session of Position of Neutrality with a prayer, and Chaplain Lee's in the house.
Come on and stand to your feet all over the room. Amen. Let us pray. Father, we thank you again today for this time and this hour. We thank you, Lord, for a day that was not promised to us on yesterday, but you saw fit to wake us up in our right mind, to gather together here in unity. We ask you, Lord, that you will use your manservant on tonight as we endeavor into step 2, recognizing there is no greater power than you, and that's who we call on, because we know that you can do exceedingly above all that we can ask or think, but it's according to the power that's in us. So tonight, as we recognize you in a special way, we ask you, Lord, that you will bless those that are on their way. Bless those that are here on tonight. And use your manservant to speak into the lives of each and every one of us here. And forever we'll give you the praise, glory, and honor. In the mighty name of Jesus, we pray all these things. Let everyone say, amen.
Thank you, Chap. So, who's here at Position of Neutrality for the first time? Anybody? All right, good. First of all, welcome. Second, let us warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. And the primary reason that's liable to happen is that we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here, we've been doing for lots of years. We take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book. And we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why? Yeah, the process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances, yes? So what I attempt to do from where I'm standing is show you how I find my experience in their testimony, because this book is the testimony of the first 100, how they recovered, how they witnessed the recovery of thousands of others. In fact, the book is called Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. So the job that I'm trying to do is show you, in my experience, maybe make the language a little fresher so that I can bring you from the 1930s and 40s to present day and see if we can share an experience with them. Does that make sense? And tonight, we're going to be in step 2, which suggests we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Yeah? So they're going to talk to us about a process, right? Came to believe sounds like a process, doesn't it? So we're going to talk to us about a process, but the fundamental of following through with the process is the power we're going to encounter tonight. So we're going to talk about a tangible sensory power that we're going to encounter here tonight, and if you care to, you will share that. It'll be sensory. I'll call it to your attention. Does that make sense? Okay, so without going any further into explanation, we're in chapter 4, chapter entitled We Agnostics. And they start out by talking about what they've already talked to us about, sum up the first step experience of powerlessness and unmanageability. Yes? It says, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. Have most of you that have looked at this book or have been here before learned something of the nature of alcoholism, how it manifests, addiction, whatever? Okay. So it said, we hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Have they made clear to you at this point the distinction they made? Not necessarily everything you've heard in modern science, or the distinction they made. We have one symptom in common. What is it? The phenomenon of craving, maybe a manifestation of an allergy, right? Okay. So it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, Or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. So they gave us two ways for us to self-diagnose what our issue may be. Have any of you been in the first class, found that you could not stop and stay stopped? Okay, and then it says, or if when drinking, if when using, you have little control over the amount you take. How many of you found yourself there? Now, tell me which of those you discovered first. You couldn't stop and stay stopped? Who are the people who could stop for long periods of time, but you found out when you did start again, you had little control over the amount you took? Okay, it doesn't matter, one of the two or both. We're just trying to see where you are. If that's true, according to them, you're probably alcoholic. That's not me speaking, that's them. Does that make sense? And then it says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Notice how they didn't try and hide that from us. They didn't try and tell us what to do either. They just said, if you have a spiritual problem, you may need a spiritual solution. Does that make sense? And you guys are wondering why I think alcoholism is a spiritual problem? Well, why do you think they call alcohol spirits? Fairly evident, right? Okay. So then they're going to talk to us some more, if we've got your interest. To one who feels he's an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. How many of you have thought yourself atheist or agnostic, or maybe still do? Anybody? Does it seem impossible from that mindset that some spiritual experience will change you? Okay, so they're going to talk to us about the alternative, especially if he's an alcoholic, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. How many of you have concluded, regardless of what your belief is, something's got to change because I'm not tough enough to keep riding this horse? So that's really the only thing we've got to do, is be honest with ourselves that what we've been doing, no matter how much we profess it to be fun, has not been fun. And that if I continue doing it based on my experience, it's going to turn out worse than it's already turned out. Notice how they did not make me pledge allegiance to a religion at that point. A lot of people think we're trying to indoctrinate you into a cult. No, we're trying to get you out of one. All right, so to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Sean likes to chuckle at that. Do you understand why he's laughing? How many of you came to recovery, saw the steps on the wall, and thought, seems like a lot. I can do that, but I won't do this. I don't need that. I'll just not pick up no matter what. How many of you did that? So it may take a minute for us to enter into the process. You're never going to fully enter into the process until you have the encounter they're about to describe, because the power that we're going to encounter is that power that Chap was talking about, according to the power on the inside of us that can do more than we ask, think, or imagine, but only as we acknowledge that power in us and through us. Yes? Okay. So, but it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. So what type are they talking about? Atheist or agnostic. Now think of the profound nature of this testimony. The first 100 talking about the first several thousand, now several million. Starting off with the testimony of the first half of the first 100 were atheists or agnostics to begin with, and they were so radically rearranged that they wrote this book for us to find ourselves today. We don't think about that if we came from a church family and we think, oh, I'm a backslider or whatever. But somebody that says God does not exist, and all of a sudden not only does this power exist, but he lives and breathes through me. It's a rearrangement that's pretty handy to know if you're an addict of the hopeless variety like I found myself to be. Okay, so So then it says, at first some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. How many of you didn't think you were that bad? I'm not that bad. I'm not going to need all those meetings and stuff. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. How many of you didn't realize we were signing up for a new manner of living? Some of us like to talk about recovery like it's a one and done. Some of us like to talk like it's a social club. It may be all of those things, but if I am this addict of the hopeless variety, I need a whole new manner of living. I need to quit building it up just to tear it down. Any of you built a few things up just to tear it down? Did you get a little tired of everyone else watching it and then trying to make excuses for yourself when you're like, I don't even know why I do it? Perhaps it's going to be that way with you. You see why I'm trying to get you to buy in? I want you to join me in their experience. No one can convince you, but that power within you, if you're honest, will allow you to come to believe based on an acknowledgement of powerlessness in spite of what we're professing, yes? So it says, but cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So they're saying half of them believe there was no God, or that God could not be proven to exist. And the process after the encounter proved them that they could subordinate those thoughts and own the experience they were having, and in that, live in that power and live an abundant life, a new manner of living. Does that make sense? Not a theology, simply a lived experience of desperately needing power to carry out what I professed I wanted, and then finding said power, and then suddenly being able to act better than I want to some percentage of the time. Yes? Sound like it might work for some of you? Okay. It won't work for you? Okay. I've seen it work for you. All right, so if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So how many of you tried changing your playmates and playthings? How many of you found out they put heroin and stuff on other playgrounds? I mean, once I met them, I know how to find them, right? Any of you ever find a place you couldn't find nothing? Not for freaking long, huh? Okay. All right, but we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us no matter how much we tried. How'd they find it? They lived through it, didn't they? This is about you deciding if this is your life or not. Not telling you if it is, but if it is you, if you've tried to be better and you wanted to be better and you knew yourself to be better, but you couldn't do better, then I need power aligned with my being to help do. Does it make sense? Okay. So it said we could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. So they've told you something about the power. The nature of this power is that it has the power to philosophically comfort me. And I don't care what you believe about theology, all of us have been in brainstorms. And none of us can get ourselves out of our own brainstorm if we're just honest about it. I know I shouldn't think this way. I can't stop thinking this way. And when I'm stuck there in that grievance, I need a power greater than me to philosophically comfort me. They're witnessing to that power. Some of you are feeling me. Who's feeling that? Okay. You're feeling the power we call God, not me. We're sharing that. Does that make sense? Okay. So our human resources as marshaled by the will were not sufficient. They failed utterly. That's their testimony. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. So that's kind of a no-brainer, yes? Obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? That would be the question, right? Some of you have been here before. Some of you have read the book. People that are new to this may not know, But we've been looking outside of ourselves all our life for that power, right? I want a new position, I want a new relationship, I want a new circumstance. I was always looking in the wrong place. It's like the horse chasing the carrot on a stick. Yeah? So, rather than keep everyone in suspense, let's go to page 55, then we'll come back. Fair enough? So, on page 55, second paragraph down, it says, actually, we were fooling ourselves. So who's we? The first 100. So they're not telling you you're fooling yourself. They're saying, we were fooling ourselves, and let us detail for you the discovery we had of this personal power within us. Make sense? Deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. So where did they say we would find it? Now, notice what they said. The fundamental idea of God. You know why that power could restore atheists and agnostics? Because they didn't say the fundamental idea of Joe. My idea of God is not the problem. It's my lack of knowledge about God's idea of me. How many of you found out how valuable you were when you found out what his idea for you was? Some of you are feeling that. Who's feeling that? That's the power we call God. So it may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it's there. So there are things that happen to us in life, calamities. We get born into families that are not capable of caring for us. We have death and destruction in our families, or they're sickened in some way, and somehow we fall into abuse. Those are calamities. Maybe we respond badly in a moment and end up with a 10-year or 20-year sentence out of one bad reaction. Those are calamities. They've obscured my consciousness of my divine identity. Pomp, when the good things happen, Joe did it. And when the bad things happen, y'all did it. Any of you ever lived that life? That's pomp. And then worship of other things. Do I really need to explain that in a room like this? We've been chasing something that's going to make us feel or comfort us in some way outside of ourselves, and we know intuitively that's false, but we still chase, even past destruction. Yes? The authors talked about that. We chase it into the gates of calamity and death. Yeah? Okay. So then it says, for faith and a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw, who's the we? We finally saw, so the first 50 that were just thinking they were backsliders, they realized they had not had relationship, they had had religion. And the people who didn't believe it was necessary simply didn't know that the power to live was within them, and they needed to empower the power to live because the power in them that wanted to die was quite powerful in their life. Any of you relate to that? So we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup. Where's my meth addicts? Did you worship the lifestyle that meth produced for you? Absolutely. We can go by any freeway on-ramp and show you the temples. So we already have that in us, yes? Now they're going to tell us just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. How many of you have had a feeling for a friend? Yeah, your meth addicts had all kinds of friends, didn't you? What they're trying to tell us is the sensory nature of the power. They're not saying that this power is a feeling, but they are saying your awareness of the power is the feeling is the power we call God. If you in your spirit are aware of an emotion that is happening to you in your spirit, you need to realize that's the power that's sustaining you through the experience. And once you realize you're not the emotion and you're not the thought, you're the experiencer of it, now you're in relationship. Does that make sense? And if we'll improve consciousness, then we'll be able to witness with power without being overcome by the power of that emotion. Does that make sense? And then I can share with depth and weight, because I can talk to you about a dead man pulled to life in order to provide a place for others to come get well. Does that make sense? All right, so he was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to read the one part. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. So how are we going to find this power? Search fearlessly within. So they've told me that's the only place the power can be found, and there's only one who has all power. So I can quit looking out in the world for ease and comfort or trouble. Because the problem centers in the mind. Does that make sense? So it's never out there. Okay. So we good? Where and how? Everyone sort of with us? Well, let's go back. All right. So, middle of page 45. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. What's that? Where and how are we to find this power? Right? The only reason we read this book is to find out where and how we can find this power to live. And the only thing we got to admit as humans is until someone who knows how to experience this book shows us, we can't read it. How many of you are learning something here today while I'm showing you how to read it? We got to show everyone else how to read it, not the bullshit they're going to hear at some room. It's a doorknob or light bulb. That's not going to help. Number one, unless you swallowed it, that's a lie. Anyone here swallow doorknobs and light bulbs? I mean, I heard a weirder shit. It may not have been swallowed. Where's my meth addict? She did some stuff. Okay. But that's a story for another day. Okay, its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. What is my problem? You want me to tell you what our problem is as humans? A loss of identity. And this power has to solve that. This power has to come into me powerfully so I know who I am and whose I am. And then I have no problem. Does that make sense? That means we've written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral, and it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Of course we're going to talk about power. How am I going to solve the powerlessness problem if I don't talk about power? Why do we say power when I say God? Because some people come here with prejudice. And I don't want to lose somebody because they're prejudiced because of the way they were treated by religious people. And we're sorry you were treated bad by religious people. We're sorry you were treated bad by recovery people. But we are God's people. And we're going to tell you, come on in. Hey, I'm glad you guys got the wave going. You got to keep that. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. Here's our fellowship. We're having fun, right? And we're talking about your problems, and we're giving you hope that there's a solution to those problems. Yes? And we can come to these rooms, and all of us kind of know what those problems look like, and we can have a giggle about it sometimes. Yeah? But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we've reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. Any of you relate to what they're talking about? Man, I just don't really want you to talk about that. I can do everything but the God part. Guys, the one thing you cannot do is the power part. You got to have power. There ain't no God part. There's a Joe part in a God entirety. So it says, we know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. If you're new, or if this is new to you, your only obligation to yourself is to share your honest doubt and prejudice. Because if you will do it with any of us who know, we are compelled to enlighten you. Just to introduce you to the power, right? If you're an instrument of the power and you are asked, will you not drop everything you're doing and introduce them to the power? Of course we will, because that's our obligation. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the Word God brought up a particular idea of Him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. How many of you had unkind people trying to talk to you about a loving God? It happens. How many of you misinterpreted people's kindness for something else? Or how many of you discovered what they thought was kindness was not kindness at all, but some kind of transactional thing? Those are people issues. That's not divinity issues. Does it make sense? Perhaps we've rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. How many of you thought, wait a minute, there's got to be more to it than that? Any of you ever get angry when someone said, you got to do it this way or no way? With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. How many of you got there? You met the people that sort of talked one way and did another, or maybe they actually talked one way and did what they said, but you looked at it and go, oh, I got a much more fun plan for my life. So we've all sort of rejected a better life for something that looked like a more fun life from time to time. Yes? Any of you ever tripped over a nickel trying to pick up a penny? All right, so we looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. So I'm speaking to some of you that have been hurt by the prejudice. Let's not stay there, but if you're among those, understand if you felt this any time while I've been talking to you, you've already had your encounter with this power. This power wants a relationship with you, and if you'll follow through, you'll walk out into a much more abundant life. And if you can hear me, this same power says things in another book, my sheep know my voice, and they follow me. Another's voice they will not follow. That's because it's ringing in you. Does that make sense? Okay. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? You ever had that thought? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow?
The supreme being.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about it is, why do we spend so much time trying to comprehend that which we don't believe in? Why is that vastness such a curiosity to the likes of us? I like for people to question their thinking and just bring themselves home. The fundamental wisdom of God is not, to Sean's point, that he knows all things because he created all things. The fundamental wisdom of God is that he knows that he is not that which he created. If I would just know that I am not that which I created, then I would understand the need for relationship with Creator, so I'd know what I was here for. Does that make sense? Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? So they want us to go to a place where we are experiencing something that just takes us out of ourselves. They said something in nature, but it may be some of you had children that you gave birth to. And though you went through a great deal of trial and tribulation, all of a sudden there's the baby, and the baby's healthy, and you're, wow, that's a miracle. And you forget, yes? And for dads, you probably had that experience without all the pain. All I'm trying to talk about is we've seen something in nature took us out of ourselves. It's almost like we're having an out-of-body experience. Are you with me? How many of you have been in a scary situation? Look at who I'm talking to. Come on. Did you notice at the moment that you're in that fight, the guns are firing and the bullets are whizzing by, the time seemed to slow down? You ever been in a car wreck? Everything seemed to slow down for you even though it was happening really rapid? When that happened, you experienced your consciousness. Does that make sense? Anyone here ever want to be an athlete? You ever make the perfect catch, the perfect dive, the perfect throw, the perfect shot? Like you knew. When you went to take it, no matter how difficult anyone watching, you knew you were going to make it. Have you had that experience? When you did that, you experienced your intuitive self. Has everyone who cared to had one of those or multiple of those experiences? Okay, well, that's your encounter with this power. Because that power is available on demand for you. Does that make sense? So now that we know it's real, and we're not talking theologies, we're talking powers we've experienced that often have sustained us in difficult situations, now what we need to do is start moving in that faith that what's been done before will be done again. Yes? Okay. All right. So that there was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. So see how they already acknowledge the human condition. We've all been through it, then we get through it, we go, glad I got through that. And then the next little bump comes, and I'm done. Yes? Instead of recounting, wherever you've brought me from is much worse than wherever you're taking me, and whatever you got to peel off of me to take me where you want me to go, I'm in. Yes? This is the coming to believe process. Yes? Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, so do that, not just metaphorically, but physically. Prejudice, sit over here. We'll re-examine it later and see if it serves me. Right? Don't prejudge the moment because everything's going to be new. Who was it? Ryan tells me tonight. He goes, when am I going to get over everything normal feeling weird? I said, never, because you have never had normal in your life. You don't know what normal is. And the fact is, no one else knows what normal is either. It's a mystery every day. And we think we got it all dialed in, and we go home, the plumbing's not working. Or whatever. I just saw Kelly. So, okay. So, we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. So see, the authors in the beginning spoke to people of power, and they meant it, and they separated the idea from anything that would block us. And they said, you're probably going to need some human that's walking in faith first, and that's going to be the power until you encounter the one within you, and then they're going to walk with you. So when you think you're having weird experiences, saying, no, you're just coming into your identity. Does that make sense? So much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Why? I almost went too fast, and they missed it. Yeah, God's not a conception. For our purposes, this power is a sensory experience that we can share. And not only that, we can become aware of the experience the person we're trying to help is having, even when they're too far dead to know they're having it. Where's my people that have done fifth steps? Did you find yourself emoting when the person you were working with was smiling? Yeah, because they had their mask on and you were feeling the full weight of the emotion, weren't you? There's another book that talks to us about that too. About we carry their burdens when necessary. Because he carries ours all the time. Okay? All right, so it says, our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and effect a contact with him. So where's the approach going to happen? We're going to look inside and we're going to acknowledge what happened. If it happened for you tonight, you're already there. Now it's just a matter of moving in the manner of living. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. So a new sense of power and direction provided What's the provision? We took other simple steps. What do you imagine those are? Well, we're in 2, so to Sean's point, maybe 3 through 12 would be indicated. Okay, so we found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It's open, we believe, to all men. Which ones? All. And they didn't do the whole gender thing well then, so they're talking about the family of man. When, therefore, we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception. We meet you where you are because he meets us where we are. We're not here to argue. We don't get points for recruiting you. We simply have an obligation in order to avoid our own calamities to acknowledge his sacrifice and give the word of our testimony. So this applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. That's why the old-timers used to give you a book called a dictionary. And it's not a particular dictionary. It's any dictionary that has that word, so you can find a meaning of the word that does not disturb you. Because what you don't want to do is let your prejudice, driven by fear, block you from the life you so desperately want. Any of you ever wanted something desperately but lacked the power to move through it because what if? At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. So people take things out of context when they teach this and they say it's a God of my understanding. That's not what they said. First, I need a conscious relation, an awareness of being aware of a power in and on my life that is in fact greater than me. And then once I enter into that new relationship, everything's new. Does that make sense? Afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth, but if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So where is that? Conscious relation. This encounter is so important. Acknowledge that you've had it, and then consult that power about enacting the decision of moving into the manner of living. The searching and fearless moral inventory, the making of amends, the growing in prayer and meditation, and ultimately taking this power out for a walk and being the hands and feet of God. Does that make sense? So we used our own conception, however limited it was. It doesn't matter where you start as long as you don't stay stopped. Move into it. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? Okay, here's one that I say sometimes that makes people knickers get in a knot. If at this point you are unwilling to look yourself in the eye in a quiet place and say you believe there is a power greater than you, you're wasting valuable high time. Get out there and get her done, Tiger. Because the reality is I don't even come here till I suspect the chemicals that chase me in here are power greater than me. No one's talking about a theology here. Am I done tilting against the windmills? And if I am, and I don't even believe that I can get better, but I am willing to admit to you that I'm done, then if you'll walk with me, I'll show you a new way to live that will not require you to go diving into your obsessions anymore if you don't want it. Does it make sense? So as soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he's on his way. How can I be so emphatic in that assurance? How can they be so emphatic? Because they've seen hundreds, they've seen thousands do it if they would just start moving. Yeah? It's been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. What's the cornerstone they're speaking of? My willingness to believe. Having heard, faith comes by what? By hearing. So if you've heard it and it's resonated, now there's enough faith in you to walk it out. But you're going to have to take some actions because it's obscured, and we got to get conscious. We got to wake up, right? Okay. So this is what they say next. This was great news for us. So you got to ask yourself, is that great news? Or are you thinking, who is this crazy old fuck yelling this stuff at me? Because I really don't take it personal. I understand. I sometimes wonder who he is too. For we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless that we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. Are you blocked because you thought you had to come perfect? Are you blocked because somebody told you your identity and it was not what your divine identity is? Somebody gave you an identity based on your behavior, not your birthright? Has that ever happened to anyone here? Did you believe it? Unfortunately, we did, even though we didn't know we believed it, did we? So we got to start taking captive those thoughts and walk out into it. So when people presented us with the spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believed. Have you ever had those thoughts? Aspired to something, and you could hear it, and it resonated in your spirit, but you thought, I could never get there. Let me tell you a little secret. If you can hear it, you already got it. The only thing we need to do is wake you up to it, which we're more than happy to do, and we are honor-bound to do. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. Wherever you are is where you start. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Any of you ever found yourself handicapped by those things? Any of you ever just been obstinate? How many of you were so obstinate you wouldn't even admit when people called you on your obstinance? So life's going to unfold, and we've got to kind of go with what it is, and when we are always in disagreement with what is, we miss things. Is that true? Okay, so many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. Any of you still there? Because we don't trust it? We don't want you to talk about concepts. I want you to just own experiences. Where's the bristling come from when you hear something that disturbs you about spiritual concepts? Is it not coming from deep down inside you? Interesting. It's only there that he may be found. Maybe I ought to go talk to that power about that disturbance. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. Methamphetamine's a great persuader. Cocaine's a great persuader. Heroin, fentanyl, all great persuaders. Yes? It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. So let me take the mystery out of it for you. If you find yourself in recovery rooms, are you reasonable? Okay. Can you maintain that reasonableness if you have some accountability? Probably. That's all it's going to take, because addiction is about a lack of connection. Abstinence is not going to work for the addict of the hopeless variety. Only connection to a world bigger than I'm living in is going to do that. My power and purpose is in lifting you up because I can see your problem when I can't see my own. Does that make sense? So sometimes this was a tedious process. How many of you would have to agree with them that watching someone in addiction is a bit tedious? How many of you, when you were in addiction, knew it was tedious but didn't really have the words for it? How many of you were in addiction but were pretending to be in recovery? That's tedious. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. So the only reason we're telling the story is not to tell you you're doing anything wrong. We're just hoping that something I can tell you about the depths I went to and what I've been lifted up from and where I'm walking and thinking today can happen for you, because this power is not a respecter of person. Does that make sense? So the reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. So they already know there's going to be residual prejudice. All that you say makes sense, but we think there are some good reasons. Let's have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Is that you? Show me, don't tell me. So we acknowledge that about us as a class, right? Show me, don't tell me. Which is why practice these principles in all my affairs isn't about me talking or memorizing books. It's about walking in a better life. I don't even need to talk the talk if I'm walking the walk. Y'all make your own stories up. Same way you did when I wasn't. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they're firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Why do we believe in electrical theory?
Because I got the shit shocked out of me.
So what Sean is trying to say for people in his eloquent way is that he has experienced the effects of this unseen energy. Why are they telling us that we can come to believe in electricity by experiencing its effects? Because that's how humans come to believe. If any of you experience the effects in here tonight, and I call it to your attention, you can come to believe in this power too, because you've experienced its effects. Does that make sense? All right. Simply because it's impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. So now I have a reasonable assumption as a starting point. It's divine power that's experienced in and through me, found deep down inside me. And that would make sense now of why I would seek conscious relation, why I'd want power, peace, happiness, sense of direction flowing into me from inside me, because trying to get that information in the world has proved difficult for the likes of me. Okay? All right. So I want to jump to 49, middle of the page. It says, instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, do you want to regard yourself as an intelligent agent? In other words, it's not all up to you, but you've got an employer in a high place, well placed, and I am an agent of said employer, an intelligent one. Anyone want that? Doesn't sound bad, right? Okay, instead of, well, we didn't get to that part. Yeah, there is going to be a job description. Okay. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, when they talk about a spearhead, they're talking about the driving force. So there's an ever-advancing creation, and in my time here on earth and your time here on earth, our job is to be the driving force of that ever-advancing creation. Does that make sense? We agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? So we don't want to just agree, we want to examine it. How many of you were consulted before you were born? Seeing none, I'm going to assume, to our knowledge, none of us were consulted before we were conceived. True? So there went Alpha. Now, let's talk about the Omega, the end. How many of you have seen many of your friends pass doing the very same things you're doing? Should see a lot more hands in a room like this. How many of you wished for your end while you're in it? How many of you are still here? So that would indicate you know nothing about the end either. How many of you, like me, probably missed out on a decade or two? I don't know the beginning, I don't know the end, and there's a whole piece from 70 to 90. according to the reports. So the point is, when we examine it like they did, it is rather vain of us to think that, isn't it? Guys, I don't want to rush through this and not help you have the experience, because rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. And we got to help everybody have this experience, or we're cheating them, because you can't read this thing until you know what the experience is they're talking about. Okay, so we who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. Notice how they shifted from those religions. They didn't say that, did they? They didn't say those religions had given purpose and direction. They said those faiths. The same reason you kept going back to recovery when it appeared not to be working for you, the faith to go back to a community and finally find a way to engage in the community spared you for a day such as this, that now you can walk out in freedom. Does that make sense? But it was the faith you exhibited, not the lesson you learned. You apparently didn't learn the lesson right away if you're anything like me. Any of you have the same experience over and over and over again and learned seemingly absolutely nothing? But when I had the faith to keep going back until somebody I encountered could show me what was up, and all of a sudden it was my day, and I came out of that grave and walked into this new life. Okay, so people of faith have a logical idea what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. Yes? I'm going to jump to the bottom of 50 so you get an idea how to recognize this said power we're talking about. Bottom of 50 says, here are thousands of men and women worldly indeed. So they're calling attention to who the authors of the book are and the subject matter of the book. Yes? The first 100 and their story of the first several thousand. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, so there's a condition, they have come to believe, so they've encountered power, yes? To take a certain attitude toward that power. What is that attitude? I need to understand this isn't a theology. I need to understand this isn't that thing I'm prejudiced of. It's just an acknowledgement of this power within me to inform or to sustain. Yes? Maybe just to inspire. Maybe you're not even inspired because you're dead enough in the spirit you don't feel it in yourself, but you feel something going on here. If you're feeling it from me, it's in you. It's the only way that happens. Does it make sense? Okay, so, and to do certain simple things, there's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. How many of you could use such a revolution? How many have been sober a long time, still need a revolution? If we're honest. Okay? In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. Guys, embrace that. Search fearlessly within. Whatever your circumstance, it's preparing you for your destiny. I know many of you have had difficult circumstances. I know many of you are facing more difficult circumstances. Don't cheat yourself on the circumstance, because the power to sustain you is in you. Grow in consciousness of that, and your circumstance will either change or your attitude about it will change. Does that make sense? And this says this happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Let's do a refresher. What might those requirements be? Might want to do 3 through 12. And now I've encountered power to allow me, because it's not a one and done. That's a manner of living. Make sense? All right, so I want to go to one more thing. I told you I'd get back to 55, then I ran my mouth too long. So I'm going to talk to you about 56 for a minute, talk to you about fits, and then I'll see if you relate and we'll be done. So it says, our friend was a minister's son. Got any preacher's kids here? No, we got a few preachers around here. But I wasn't looking for their kids. I really wasn't. I met some chaps. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. See how they're identifying for you with a real-life example what calamities might look like? Because they're talking of something they really did, and they've helped thousands to do this. So we're going to look at those calamities and see what's blocked your consciousness of your identity. Does it make sense? It says post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. Any of you been to that point they're talking about? Like it's all going all bad, and I am now killing me, and I can't stop killing me, and I desperately want to stop killing me, but no one believes me anymore. Well, then we're ready. Let's read some more. One night when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. What's the condition? I'm not here to talk to you about alcoholism. I'm talking to you about talking matters of the spirit. And if you know anything about alcoholism, you know people like me should not be alive. So that means that I'm a dead man telling you about being risen from a grave. And you will listen to me if you really need it, because you'll know I know. Yes? Okay. So it says our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, if there is a God, he certainly hadn't done anything for me. But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question. So he blurted out his anger at this power, but on self-reflection, he had to get honest about his life experience. But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? Eyesight without insight, spiritual blindness. While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. How many of you were in that cross place? Either he is or he isn't, and not a theoretical discussion. I'm living such a miserable life. If you exist, I need you to come now and pull me out. That's what he's talking about. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. See, we're waiting for him to walk in the room. He's going to enter in the upper room. Does that make sense? Who are you to say there is no God? My whole life experience says that that's a lie. Not only is there, but there must be, and he must have a broader sense of justice than my finite mind. Does that make sense? This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. The thought came so hard that he went down to worship in the moment. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. How many of you have been in the Spirit and then felt the Spirit come on? They're talking about something real, aren't they? How many of you gotten heated up by it? He was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence. He was hot, and it was not hot. He was hot. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. Now they're talking about rivers of flowing water. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. How many of you had pride and prejudice fall off you? How many of you had your eyes opened? That's what they're talking about. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He had stepped from bridge to shore. What does that mean? There's a faith test where I got to quit saying what I believe and walk into what I believe. It's when I step from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator, aware that I'm walking in power, and I know whose power it is. Everyone with me? That's step 2. See you next week.